So a little bit about me. I'm Last Resort on Twitter, and I've been at Juniper for about a year, but in some ways it feels like 5 years in all the discussions I've had regarding network automation with customers, and it's a good thing because I've got to feel a lot of the pain points that people are having out there. I chose Juniper because I fell in love with the Virtual SRX. Got an early beta copy before it was released. I had a chance to play with it, and I thought about what I was doing with DevOps tooling and where networking's going and what I could do with that. And then I've been focused specifically on automation, but now we've actually built out a DevOps team where we work on DevOps type tools, automation, kitchen sink, and focused on security and switching, anything with SRX platforms, whether virtual or physical, as well as our other branch and DC switching products like the EX, QFX, and new OCX switch that we just announced. As well as a focus on Chef and Puppet specifically, and other things like that. We have a lot of people on our team now, and so just in terms of skill sets, those vary just to be able to cover everything. In other areas are OpenStack and Contrail. Before I worked at Juniper, I gave a beat-up group at Juniper to talk about Contrail, so it's been a common thing. I usually go to the OpenStack summits, so I'd like to do some working group stuff with Contrail there this time in Vancouver, if anyone's going there. And for fun, I will be at RailsConf on vacation, and I just got the new Raspberry Pi 2 that came out, so if anybody's hacking with that on Chef, I'd love to talk about it, because I haven't seen too much out there. So the topic for today, same stuff, different department. I really feel like the intersection of hybrid skills that we need today with a little bit more heavy lifting and DIY, how we get there, it's just something we need to look at. And I don't know, we need to care about domain experts and keep smashing that silo there of networkers here and breaking down the barriers to collaboration and culture. And Chef for Networking, I think, needs to focus on the domain-specific characteristics of networking, not getting there. And today, there's too much getting there. So what's at stake, really, is Chef being considered a viable tool for networking? Because there's a lot of answers out there. And I want to make Chef the best it can be, whether on Juniper or anything else, so we can keep doing things this way. So what are some of the challenges that we've seen? Worst case is the DevOps teams have little or no visibility into network automation, or there's no network automation going on. So during a workflow, maybe everything else is fast, and that part might take a little bit more time to get a VLAN or anything configured, and that's definitely a major area of pain. So long lead times for change. You might manage part of the networks like switch ports today, but that's it. And then there's a lot of proprietary network technologies and tooling out there that people are using to solve these problems. And so on the network engineering side, we like to call it cylinders of excellence. It's really a true silo today, not a lot of interaction, and we're trying to change that. Network engineers also really typically have limited systems or DevOps cloud development experience, but they're really bright people, so we definitely want to be able to help them out. But they're consistently being told, evolve or die, or learn to program tomorrow. And that's not the way to teach people things or be inclusive. There's really a lack of documented and open tooling out there, and a lack of training, like how to get there. It's, they hear buzzwords like Docker, Packer, Vagrant, Chef, and it's just spinning around in their heads while they're trying to do their normal job. There's just a lot of options. So again, some of the differences, just a really different level of experience and limited functionality today. Just configuration elements really are a small subset of features. So if someone was going to look at Chef versus something else, they're going to look at line item features, like what does Chef offer versus something else. Workflows, we don't feel like they're publicly available and consistent agreed upon workflows. You might get a switch or a router and say, here, put Chef on this, and then now put it in production. And that doesn't match what we feel a Chef workflow should look like. And so even if you have a VM sandbox, it might not integrate into existing community workflows. You can't just go to a vendor's website, download a virtual version of their product, and start using it in a workflow. And the types of people we need to work on this don't understand that workflow in the first place. So Chef support might be available on GitHub or similar, or is it available via paywall, or only known to you by binary packages installed on your device? How much visibility do we have into what's going on there? So some myths, and I really think everyone should pay attention to these because, I mean, we might hear some of these, but this has been a lot of what I've heard over the last year, just in general across the board with people I've encountered is sometimes people think that Chef doesn't do everything we need it to. Or that Chef is just Chef server and Chef client, and that's Chef. Or that Chef is only the tools that Chef itself makes, and that's Chef. Or Chef supports line item set of features. I might compare that to something else that I don't see my line item, and I assume Chef can't do it. We all know that's not true. So another thing is DevOps versus network engineering. Who's going to own this? And it's not really about ownership. The worst possible thing is that network engineering is going away. So when people are really hearing this on a repeated basis, so how do you think from a community and collaboration standpoint, people are going to react to that when they hear that? And that's their job. So dispelling some of those myths, I really feel like Chef and networking is just getting started. We're just laying the groundwork. This is not the end game. It's an ecosystem of culture, community, and tooling. It doesn't start with Chef itself. We're talking about a lot of tools as well, Omnibus, Chef provisioning, supermarket, knife kitchen, so much more, so many more things, and people need to know about that and know what those tools can do. So Chef also leverages other tools, things like Vagrant, Berkshelf, the Fog Gem for interfacing with clouds, Ruby itself and the power of Ruby in Chef configuration, and way more things that I could ever talk about today. So for collaboration, we really want to rely on the domain experts, network engineers, to focus on what they're good at and to be able to do that unencumbered and not have to worry about how they get there. So for HugOps culture, we really want to make it easier for people to learn Chef. We want to use common tooling and not just have, for every different network vendor, a whole set of tools, and definitely share things back with the open source community. And that's a question too. We've talked a lot about companies that are sharing their work back with the public. Disney and Bloomberg were some talks I went to yesterday, but I don't feel like I see that from the networking community. I mean, how many people here have shared an open source networking tool back with the community or know of anything that's not made by a company? Okay, a couple. But yeah, it's typically the exception to the rule. I feel like the networking companies and community are just behind there. We try to be as open as possible. On the Juniper GitHub, we've open sourced OpenContrail, all of our NetConf libraries, as well as what we call our easy libraries, which are intended to be for non-programmers to get started in network automation. But also all of our DevOps tooling, all of our Chef stuff, it's all on GitHub. And that's kind of been our motto for our team is just put it in GitHub. My team has another repository called JNPR Automate, and so that's a little bit more DevOps focused than just the typical Juniper GitHub. And we share all of our tools, proof of concept tools, little one-off Golang binaries, things that people can use, see the value of network automation. But we're also starting to put our training. So if you go there now, even some of the internal sessions that we're doing, we're actually sharing the GitHub repositories for those as well. So you can go out there and see what we're doing, modify it, use it, give us feedback. So how do we get there? Again, we want to leverage existing tooling. We want it to be really easy. One of the things I'll talk about today is builders and consumers and some of the workflow differences there. Some of the things we take for granted as chefs, but that are going on behind the scenes. And blueprint what that chef workflow is. However, today I'm talking a little bit more about the walk before we can run type things. We've seen a lot of network announcements about chef support or line item, bullet support, but I don't know if people are looking at like, how are we going to get there? How are we going to make this look like the existing work? So virtualization is nothing new to anyone here. Probably everything you've worked with has been a VM for quite some time, but for networking, it's a lot newer. And with recent advances like the Intel Data Plane Development Kit and other things that are making this faster, we're able to take some of those functions and push them off to virtual devices. So I can give you a carrier class router that runs the backbone of an internet in a virtual form, and that's just, to me, an amazing thing. And again, we might have VM versions of our products, but that alone isn't enough. You can't just give someone a VM and say, this is now something completely automatable. So there's definitely a road to get there. So for today's example, I'm going to talk about Virtual SRX, which is also known as Firefly or Firefly Perimeter. And it's a virtual version of our SRX series firewall. And it's supported on vSphere, KVM Zen, OpenStack, and Contrail. I'll be talking more about desktop versions as part of a workflow today. So example workflows today look like you're getting a network device. Someone says, can I get a Juniper switch? Can I get a Cisco router? I'm going to add it to Chef server, write cookbooks, test cookbooks. It's something like that. It's not necessarily defined. Deploy to production and hope for the best, as I say. What you're missing is being able to virtually replicate that environment. A true Vagrant developer environment, something that matches what you'd be doing on a server. If you can have that too, that's great. Things like Test Kitchen that rely on that layer. Common network-focused test frameworks like, okay, that's great, I can test these cookbooks, but how am I going to test to see if a port's open or something that's network-based? And maybe more common tooling there. It doesn't have to be specific to one product, because once you're talking layer 3, layer 4, it's all the same at that point, and I think we need more shared tooling there. So again, these environments can be managed by consistent and open tooling. So I think you'll be familiar with some of the tooling and concepts here as chefs, but I think the getting there part just really doesn't exist for network devices. So please keep this in mind throughout the rest of this. So bootstrapping a NetDevOps Chef workflow, same stuff, different department, should be the same thing. And again, baby steps, just getting started. It can really be a foundation for doing things the Chef way, though. And these examples are for Juniper, but I think every network vendor would need to have something similar to this in order to be able to do the same thing. So as a client, we'll use ChefDK. It has everything we need, and the common Vagrant and VirtualBox platform. We'll need to build an automation-friendly VM image and integrate that VM with common tooling like Vagrant, and then it's ready for Chef at that point. I really feel like this is one of the hidden reasons why we can't, if I have a developer and they're not able to, or they're just getting started, I can give them Vagrant, they can type Vagrant up, they can start hacking away in a class. Can't do the same thing with networking, and that really needs to change. If you're not familiar with ChefDK or you're not using it, just a quick run through. It has everything we need for this environment. There's an embedded Ruby environment for it. You don't have to worry about installing Ruby. That's always been one of the things for network engineers when we're getting started is they start building a Linux box and they quit. Not their area of expertise. So it includes things like Chef, Burkshelf, Test Kitchen, everything that you've been used to. So we've also built a VM specifically for network automation called NetDevOps VM, and it uses ChefDK when you're working with Chef. It also supports other configuration management tools and automation libraries, and Ruby and other programming languages as well for us to do classes, for people to learn on. It's just one of those consistent asks when we're working with customers in a workshop, our own field and salespeople, just anybody that's wanting to learn network automation. And we're building that with Chef. There's a NetDevOps cookbook on GitHub, and it's also in Supermarket. Definitely open for collaboration or feedback there. and it's available in Atlas, so you can type Vagrant up and start a classroom. You can have people download it the night before. We don't have 50 people trying to download something in a class at the same time and killing the internet connection. So Chef Bento, I think, is something, how many people are familiar with Bento? So Bento is a project to create the base boxes that almost everything chef-related uses. It's a series. It uses a tool called Packer, which, if you're not familiar with, is for building these boxes, and I'll show you a quick version of that in a minute. It uses JSON templates to describe the environments, bash scripts, which are a type of provisioner. You could also use Chef or other automation tools to configure those. And then it's that similar meme like Pixie booting a server with Kickstart and pre-seed. So consumers have downloaded these boxes millions of times. Not a lot of people, there's a lot of people out there that might not know that they exist, but it's a really important part of Chef. It's where those test kitchen VMs come from. So it could be made to install Chef, but it doesn't by default because you're typically using a specific version for your environment. So my SSDD version I call Firefly Packer. Now this is specific to Firefly or VSRX, but this could also be modified to work with any environment. We're leveraging common tooling and doing things the Chef way there. And this is used to build VMware and VirtualBox Vagrant boxes. It could also spit out images, and it could also work with other platforms. And it uses Packer boot commands to create a just enough operating system for Junos. I can enable management protocols like SSH or NetConf, and then I'm ready to go. Give it common authentication information. But a consumer could also look at what we've done, and they don't have a common way of building a VM for their environment, so they can modify this and make role-specific golden images. But they could also do this upstream in Vagrant or with network automation. An example which might be tough to see, sort of the magic, and this is really something we have to think about because this might not seem like this has tons to do with Chef, but it does, because how are we going to make these network platforms work with Chef? We're going to work on VMs, and we need the VMs to work. So this isn't specific to Juniper. Even if a network operating system runs CentOS or a common Linux platform, it still doesn't have the same traits. It's not ready to work. So what we're doing here is actually typing boot commands to the device, because there's no way for me to take that golden OVA image that I'm getting from the vendor or QCOW2 and actually get that just enough operating system in there. So kind of neat. I'll show you the quick version of the video, but this is actually really similar to how Bento works. So here I'm running some prep scripts that are handling OVA type things. I'm actually using VMware's OVF tool. There was so this will all be on SlideShare. I'm not sure about the video, but I can put that up in online. So I'm skipping through the build scripts. What it's actually doing is launching an instance of VirtualBox and VMware Fusion, or it could be Workstation on Windows, Linux, or Mac. It's completely cross-platform, a Go binary. And I'm basically creating a just enough operating system on these. At the end, it spits out a Vagrant box, but that could just as easily be a golden OVA for an organization as well, or other virtual formats. So at the end, when that's done, it's just going to give me the file. And so where do we go from there? We've got a Vagrant box, and Chef base boxes are all available in Atlas. You can Vagrant up any of these environments and start working, and it's a common platform. Either via direct access by adding them or through tooling like Test Kitchen. It might be happening in the background without you knowing. And so Linux flavors are supported by default Vagrant plugins. And then we get into the problem here where any network operating system, be it Junos or anything else, those same types of default plugins that are built into Vagrant don't understand network configuration, et cetera. So we've got to have Vagrant plugins for the same type of support. So we wrote a guest plugin for Junos. Currently supports VSRX, but in the future it could be extended to support other platforms. Default Vagrant features for any guest operating system include detecting an operating system. So in this case, it's Junos. Inserting or removing an SSH key. So you don't have to actually log into the device manually. And that could be huge for networking labs because just imagine you have a topology and you have a lot of routers. Like, how are you going to log into all of them? It's time consuming. And you can configure all the interfaces on the device with static or DHCP, set the subnet mask, et cetera. And this could also be extended to support Juno-specific features. Other networking operating systems will definitely need something similar to this in order to be part of this workflow. So something for everyone to keep in mind. And again, these Vagrant boxes are all on Atlas. You can go there today. It's atlas.hashicorp.com/Juniper and see all the boxes we've got there. Vagrant up Juniper/box name. An example Vagrant file, and again, this might be tough to see, so I'll explain. This is a very simple example, but I'm configuring a host name, which is templated out with an ERB template to Junos, as well as the network interfaces. Some of those are static, some of those are DHCP, and I'm not using subnet masks there, but I could be. One of the open issues there I have is to support interface descriptions as well. So now that we've got a box, one of the first things we want to do is be able to use it with Test Kitchen. And if you're not familiar with Test Kitchen and you're writing Chef, then I'd be surprised, but it's a test harness, and you can execute your code on one or more platforms in isolation, meaning you're spinning up a VM and executing your code and then tearing it down. It's included with ChefDK. You don't need a Chef server to run these tests. That's one of the more common things I've seen with networking examples in Chef, or people say, oh, first build a Chef server, and here's how to build a completely redundant Chef server environment, without people really looking at like, oh yeah, we can do this without a Chef server to get started. Just that's the kind of stuff out there. Your dependencies can be resolved with Berkshell for Librarian, used for all of Chef cookbooks for testing, as well as most public cookbooks out there. It supports things like Vagrant or DigitalOcean, and there are multiple platforms per driver, like different operating systems. I think these are the same traits we want to have. So Kitchen Vagrant can also support network operating systems as well. So for Junos, again, you need the Vagrant Junos plugin, but and then again, if you don't want to use VirtualBox, you can use VMware Workstation or Fusion. This could also support other cloud platforms as well, because Kitchen supports tons of platforms if you don't want to do development on your local system. So again, traits specific to a network operating system. Today, you're specifying the boxes you're going to be connecting to because the default Kitchen Vagrant plugin supports Chef's boxes. But we could have a plugin to support Junos or other network operating systems. And then today, we don't support desktop platforms, again, but it could be cloud-based. And there are no released test frameworks. We don't have commonality there. But I would think that's the next step that needs to happen. That's great. We've got Kitchen. Other than just testing Chef cookbooks, what are we going to do with networking? An example, kitchen.yaml, again, pretty straightforward, whereas here these names would just point to Chef boxes in Atlas. We're just having to add manual links there for the box name and what would show up in Vagrant box list, as well as the box URL. But that's about it. And here's an example of the types of testing I would be doing. I start off running a recipe to do Junos hardening. And then after that, maybe a set of edge firewall rules. And then at the end, do an Nmap scan to figure out if any ports are open or anything's leaking. It's a pretty contrived example, but just to plant a seed of the types of things we'd want to do there. So when you see kitchen list, to me that's a good thing to think about, like what I could do with this is here I've loaded up 6 different versions of VSRX, and now I can run tests against all these. How would you have done this before with networking? Are you going to get that many versions of devices? Do you have a lab like that? I don't know too many people at any companies I've talked to that have good networking labs, and this really gives us a lot of flexibility, especially with multiple versions, to be able to test them all simultaneously. Let's see here. So a recap here, until we have these consumable network base boxes, we can't replicate a common workflow. I really think this is important because until we have this, like, how do you do this the same way? If anyone has any, answers or ideas, I'd love to know. But to me, we're doing things the same way that we would be doing them with Chef. I really feel like the builders, whether it's network engineers, people that are community members, vendors, that people need to step up and make things work for people and not just give them an OVA and say this works on this platform, do everything yourself your own way or this proprietary way. And I say Chef for networking as a state. I think Chef for networking is going to be great. I think it'll be fine. I'm just saying these to me are the important things that need to happen. And then the O'Reilly book for learning Chef, I feel like you should be able to take a book like that as well as networking domain expertise and be just fine at that point. I think the thing there is dehydrated, sorry. Today, I don't feel like it's like that. If I give someone a learning Chef book and it's not the same, it's just more stuff for them to figure out. So today we officially support Chef on the EX and QFX switching platforms, and thinking about domain-specific knowledge, taking all of that where we've taken that workflow, we've gotten there, and what are we going to do with it now? So Netdev is a Chef cookbook that's stored on the Chef server, and that's able to be called by Junos, and that's copied down to the actual switch, which is running a Chef client. So it's got a Ruby package. The JChef package is actually a bundle that has Ruby. It has a netconf gem installed, and this is able to configure the device via netconf. And Netdev is completely open source, and it's a common platform that we worked with Arista on, so not proprietary. Good stuff. I'd like to see more of that in networking. I don't feel like there's a lot of that out there. So if I have an environment and workflow that's able to get me to a learning Chef type thing where I've got my installed environment, I'm able to start using Test Kitchen, I'm able to start writing cookbooks, what does that really look like? And if we've taken care of that hard part of just figuring out all the virtualization and making things work with our existing environment, the actual configuration is pretty easy. And again, if you can't see this here, this will be on SlideShare. But the Chef syntax here, I'm just doing VLAN creation. And if you look at Junos versus Chef configuration, it's very similar. So now I take a network engineer that was trying to put all that stuff together. They're trying to figure out their development environment. They're trying to figure out how to get it all together. Now they're just able to take a syntax that's very similar, at least learnable, and just focus on the problem there. And again, these are somewhat simple examples. Here I'm creating lags, but one of them works in a code editor with syntax highlighting and has a lot of background, and one of them is a network operating system configuration that's completely different for every vendor. So I feel like that's a lot better. This is something that you can do, and this could be extended to different platforms as well. This specific example is for networking. However, I'd like to see more of this in security, routing, just anything else we can configure. Some other thing that you could do here is instead of having a specific syntax, we could do configuration templating. And that's something that's been really popular with our Python EZ library. But I like to see more things like that in Chef. And one other example here, I'm just doing a port to VLAN assignment. Again, pretty simple stuff. If you can't see this, again, we'll share. But again, it's somewhat simple Ruby code, but it's just so we can show the mapping to Junos and what the difference is. So it's equivalent. I originally did this in Markdown with another program and then had to convert it at the end. And it's not quite like what I wanted it to be in terms of being able to replicate that in PowerPoint. So we're not quite there. Someone please automate that. So in closing, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the hacks. I just didn't feel like that was ready for prime time. So I made a repository in GitHub if you want to start and come back later called Juno Chef Examples. But I wanted to have some hacks in terms of just different things you can do that aren't supported or maybe a little just out there, shortcuts to help you out, tips and tricks, and then learning as well as cookbook authoring best practices. Things like that. I mean, if you're a network engineer getting started, there just aren't a lot of resources. So you'll see a lot more of that on our Juniper Automate GitHub. On Twitter, I'm at Route Last Resort, and if you follow me there, if you want to find out about new things, that's probably the best place. I'm also restarting my blog, which is routeoflastresort.com, and I should have a lot of entries up there. I talk about Open Contrail, OpenStack, Chef, network automation, just a little bit of everything in there. And then my Twitter team, now we're Juniper Automation is our main account, but everyone else on my team is there. Rob Cameron, Kurt Bales, Aaron Banks. If you haven't followed them, they're all really neat people. I work on a really cool team. We get to do a lot of neat things. So, and got Matt Ray here from Chef.
He's going to pass around the mic for questions. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, so I run partner engineering for Chef, so I've been happy to work with Juniper. We're working on kind of productizing these sorts of things. So, not only will, you can get them off of GitHub, but if you get them from Juniper or get them from Chef, we actually stand behind them and will help you and support knows what the heck you're talking about when you email them like, hey, this, SRX cookbook isn't working for me. And you're like, we never heard of that. So we're trying to make it all official and stuff. Anybody have any questions? All right, we'll start right here. Oh, you go.
Hey, how you doing? Well, one question I have. So I'm thinking like barriers to entry with this, and I'm thinking, man, all the networking equipment, all these different vendors have their own flavor of OSs or unique Linux installs or Unix installs. And so trying to get Chef Client to work on all of these might be a pain over time. And so have you thought about doing it from the other way around? Like with Chef Metal and provisioning today, it's just calling an API. And so could you define your networking rules and definitions as an API and it just calls out to the router?
I definitely think that Chef provisioning has a place in virtual and even physical networking. I've talked about it a lot. I think we need some of these other things to work first. Again, it's the getting there first. I want to make that part the handled part that builders take care of so consumers can take advantage of it. And I think that's what we're pushing for to get to that point. Chef provisioning is definitely compelling.
And we're going to hit it on a lot of different fronts. So when we can get an agent on a box, because that's nice if we can. So we have the Junos port. That was there. We've got support for a couple other things. But some devices you can't fit a Chef agent on. We'll hit them from the API. we might come up with some more creative ways to get Chef managing those systems and still maintaining the entire state of the box. It's one thing to fire calls into an API and then walk away because you don't know, well, did it get everything? Or what was there when I started? You want Chef to manage the entire state of that service, whether or not you're on the box. So we're going to have to attack it on a lot of different fronts. So, question here?
Sure. Thanks. Mine's kind of a follow-on to his to a certain extent. We have a fairly heterogeneous, I think that's the right word, switch environment. We've got crazy, we've got some Juno switches, some InterAssist, some Extreme. They're kind of all over the place. And right now we're doing automation with like some crazy Python code base, SSHing into them and, slamming switch commands down the line. I'm wondering if you see a future where Chef will help us sort of unify all that and like how will you get the vendors to get on board to make that a reality?
So that's something that we've done in the past. Like I mentioned with the Netdev thing with Arista, I really like to see more of that. To me, if you wanted to have a litmus test for your network vendor, it's how open are you really? And companies have to make money, but supporting open protocols is something I see, that we do really well. And beyond just protocols, open things that make it easier for our customers. Like we don't want to lock people in. I think we put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah. I mean, Juniper's been very progressive, or aggressive, however you like to think about it, on the Chef front and automation. It's aggressive and progressive because network automation and storage, and that's kind of like the last throws. Like those are the guys like, well, we're too important. You can mess up a computer, but if you mess up the switch, you can't get to the computers, right? And so we're going to try to work with the standards where we can. If there's commonality between InterAssist and Extreme and Juniper and Open Compute, we're going to try to hit those, as well as if we can't work with the standards, we'll work with the vendor's version of stuff where we can. So it's going to be heterogeneous. One size does not fit all, but
yeah, I mean, my goals for this are to just get people chefing up. It's let's just get them to that point first, and then they start to see the value, and then we get the crazy network hackers and the crazy minds. Like if I take the DevOps guy, he doesn't, he needs to get a switch. He can't start hacking on it. That's not right. And if I have the network guy, he's got the barriers to entry. Like we want to take all those away so people can just make magic happen.
Yeah. Right here.
Thank you. So, a quick question about these virtual images. Is it like the older version of a network stack that you can bring up on a virtual machine on your box and do a simulator, do a bunch of bring a bunch of switches and connect them with each other and that sort of thing?
So right now, this specific example for authoring Chef and working with Chef and testing Chef is specific to desktop virtualization environments. It could support something more complex, cloud-based networking, et cetera. It's a starting point where that's where we're trying to get to right now. And I think for where I see the entire industry going is you should be able to replicate your entire network. And not with a toy, not like a GNS3 thing. I love GNS3, but it should be a DevOps tool. It shouldn't be a toy, because you're just teaching someone something that's probably going away.
Right.
Connecting network devices together. How many people just connect routers together all day? Not a lot. So.
Right, but this is why I think what the big value in configuration management together with an application. Say you have an application that brings up and needs to configure a multicast port and network and that sort of thing, and talk to something else. So I was curious how far this went.
Well, I mean, if you have if you wanted to do a virtual data center environment, what real use is it if you can't replicate exactly what it looks like with all the connectivity between? So we're thinking about that a lot.
Well, thanks a lot, John. That wraps up our session. So if you have any questions, we can take them out in the hall. But thank you very much.
Thank you.